As we continue with the Testament of Solomon, we see our protagonist become more and more proficient with locking away demons. As you might have noticed, each encounter he finds himself in, he seems to maneuver around them with relative ease. Not only this, but each encounter becomes shorter and shorter, regardless of how fearsome or tremendous the demon might be. Admittedly, after having faced off against the demon seahorse, it's possible that Solomon might have assumed that he'd reached the bottom of the barrel when it came to demon kind. And you know what, he might have been right. Until he came across the subject of today's video, a demon swordsman, or a father of giants, or perhaps the last Nephilim. Solomon tells us, "And there came before my face another enslaved spirit, having obscurely the form of a man, with gleaming eyes, and bearing in his hand a blade. And I asked, Who art thou? But he answered, I am a lascivious spirit, engendered of a giant man, who dies in the massacre in the time of the giants." Now, there's no way to determine whether or not this entity is one of the Nephilim, as the text doesn't exactly specify this. Also, you might point out that by the time of Solomon, the Nephilim would have already been wiped out during the flood, according to the apocalyptic text known as the Book of Enoch, at least. For those of you who don't know, the Nephilim were said to have been brought about in a time predating Noah, where the Watchers, an angelic host of God, essentially ended up betraying him by descending upon earth and taking the mortal women for themselves. Their offspring, however, are repulsive giants, those whose tempers are unquenchable, which sees them wreaking havoc not only on earth, but upon man as well. In the Book of Enoch, God sends his archangels to destroy the Nephilim, and those who remain are eventually drowned in the flood. For the most part, these Nephilim are described as giants, and this is furthermore established in the Bible, in Numbers 13:32 through 33, where the spies of Moses spot the creatures during a reconnaissance. They state, "And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come of the Nephilim, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers." Of course, given that Moses and the 12 tribes of which the spies came from were after the flood, it would imply that somewhere, somehow, that some of the Nephilim survived the flood, assuming that the Book of Enoch is treated as canon. Of course, it must be noted that the Book of Enoch was actually removed, and so if you were to look at it now, this argument would be widely disputed. Given that the spirit in this instance with Solomon describes himself as being engendered of a giant man who dies in the massacre in the time of giants, he also appears to confirm himself as giving rise to the giants, or that he could very well be the father of giants / Nephilim. This may imply that he is a first generation Nephilim, that either mated with another to produce yet another line of his kind, or perhaps even a Watcher himself, he who impregnated a mortal woman to bring forth the first of these unholy beings. You'll notice he refers to himself as lascivious, revealing that he was very much interested in sex, much as the Watchers appear to be. To say he is a Watcher, however, might be a bit of a stretch, given that Solomon does not describe him as having wings, nor bearing the resemblance of an angel. Instead, Solomon describes him as having the obscure form of a man, possibly implying the disfigured and horrific appearance that is commonly applied to that of the Nephilim. Additionally, this being might not be a Nephilim at all, as he does refer to himself as a spirit, and might simply be a dishonest demon, attempting to either intimidate Solomon with his presence, or to give himself a more noteworthy or menacing appearance. You might also say that as a spirit who engendered a giant man in the time of the giants, that this spirit had been around during the time before the flood, and that he helped orchestrate the creation of the Nephilim, or maybe even seduce the Watchers into taking the mortal women in the first place. Solomon proceeds to ask the creature where it lives and what it does, to which the demon earnestly replies, "My dwelling is in fruitful places, but my procedure is this. I seat myself beside men who pass among tombs, and in untimely season I assume the form of the dead, and if I catch anyone, I at once destroy him with my sword. But if I cannot destroy him, I cause him to be possessed with a demon, and to devour his own flesh, and the hair to fall off his chin." Here we learn that the spirit likes to dwell in places of great fortune and enjoys the comforts of a fruitful abode. However, he also tells us that he hides amongst tombs, where men are prone to pass, possibly explorers, and that he assumes the form of the dead. Whilst never specified, this might be in reference to the Egyptian pharaohs, those who when passed away would be encased in a sarcophagus and sealed away inside a tomb. It was not uncommon for thieves and treasure hunters to raid these tombs in search of the former king's treasures, those which were often buried with the deceased. Here the spirit implies that he lurks amongst those very deceased, and that when explorers, or thieves, stumble upon the tomb, he kills them with his sword. He then notes that if he isn't able to destroy them, he casts upon them a demon of his own, perhaps suggesting that he has control over some lesser demons, and that those who are inflicted end up devouring their own flesh. The use of a sword is another interesting characteristic of this demon, and whilst this cannot be supported, it could be said that the sword was a product of the Watcher Azazel, he who during the time of the Nephilim gave man the knowledge of iron, steel and weaponry. In response to this, Solomon demands to know which angel frustrates the demon so as to bind it, but instead learns that like many of the others, Jesus himself is the only entity who can negate him. Whilst Jesus is never specified exactly, the use of the word Saviour indicates that this is indeed who the demon is speaking of. He tells Solomon, "He destroys me, who is to become Saviour, a man whose number, if anyone shall write it on his forehead, he will defeat me, and in fear I shall quickly retreat. And indeed, if anyone write this sign on him, I shall be in fear." With this in mind, Solomon glorifies God and tells us that this spirit, or giant, suffers the same fate as the others and is quickly shut up and sealed like the rest. The notes provided in this video are merely speculations and some cool ideas that may or may not be the author's original intentions. With that being said, let me know in the comments below some of your ideas as to who this spirit, giant, or father of giants was. And as always, don't forget to give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.